Hello, everyone, and welcome to week 9 of SEED540. All right, just a couple points on course administration here. As a reminder, the videos and discussion board questions are due the Wednesday of your assigned week. Don't forget, this is your time to practice moderating a discussion board. For the others in the class, please contribute to each question so that your classmates can practice. We had a couple questions about how many times or how often people should be posting. It might be a good idea to post to each question. And when you post, one suggestion that I might offer is to post then a return question or a clarifying question. This keeps the conversation going. This is an opportunity for all of you to practice moderating a discussion board in the online format, a skill you're probably going to be needing as teachers as we move forward here. So please take it seriously, contribute so that your other classmates can benefit. Okay, week 10 will be an independent work session. There are a couple of modules that you'll need to complete in this week. There are no readings, but there are modules that you'll need to complete. They are for a grade, so please don't forget to complete these two modules in week 10. All right, so getting ourselves prepared for this week's content. Think about a time in your life when you had to overcome an obstacle. How did you do it? What was your mindset as you were going through this? And what did you tell yourself? What were some of the self-talk things that you were telling yourself as you were going through this experience? And what did you do then in the end based on that self-talk? This week's tasks. Okay, so we have here chapter 4 in the big book, and we have 2 case studies in the little book, The Black Lives Matter and Teaching Race with Huckleberry Finn. Please take time to read through those case studies and reflect deeply. In today's discussion, this week's discussion board, we're going to have the equity group present their presentation. Be sure to watch their video and answer their questions in the discussion board. In addition, we're going to have a pair share activity. This will be something that you'll see in Wednesday when I post it, so please stay tuned. I strongly, strongly recommend that you read through it on Wednesday so that you can start engaging with your pair share partner in the discussion board as soon as possible. Again, read through the directions carefully in the discussion board for this activity. And yes, we are back to doing quizzes, so don't forget to do your quiz 9. And for the assignments, start reviewing the case study project in Blackboard. Start reading through the rubric, start reading through the directions. And if you have any questions about this particular assignment, please feel free to get in touch with me. A few comments on the tasks here. Okay, so theory into practice groups. Post your video and discussion boards in your appropriate week. Please don't forget that. I have created a thread in the discussion board where you can post your presentations and your discussion board questions. Again, we're going to be looking at equities group here this week. In the discussion board, again, we're going to be doing the pair share. You're going to be assigned a partner, and you'll have your own discussion board thread. Read through your pair share question and answer it together. Then you can go on ahead and visit the other pair share threads and see their responses. The pair share is meant to be a conversation. There are no limits or expected number of posts. Discuss, engage, and learn from each other. This is not one of those, I'm going to post and then kind of forget about it. This is meant to be a discussion between you and your pair share partner. All right, so let's get into the content here this week. We have the topic of learner diversity, and the APA Top 20 Principles this week are Principle 1. Students' beliefs or perceptions about intelligence and ability affect their cognitive functioning and learning. Principle 5, acquiring long-term knowledge and skill is largely dependent on practice. Principle 11, teachers' expectations about their students affect students' opportunities to learn, their motivation, and their learning outcomes. And finally, Principle 15, emotional well-being influences educational performance, learning, and development. You'll see here in this week's reading that they divide the chapter into 4 sections, into 4 content areas as it relates to learner diversity. They're going to be talking about culture, language, gender, and socioeconomic status. And it's important that when you read through these, you make sure you keep in mind that there are going to be 4 distinct blocks in the chapter. In this chapter, though, it's important to remember that we're discussing general patterns within these categories. We need to just recognize as well that there are going to be individual differences within these general patterns. So keep that in mind. The authors make a point of saying that, but I think it's important as we read it with a critical eye to remember that there are going to be individual differences within these general patterns. In addition to these 4 areas that they discuss in the textbook, I'd like to talk about 2 separate yet related topics. I'd like to talk about culturally responsive teaching and grit, and you'll see how these two concepts relate back to the content in the text. But I would venture to say that you're going to be hearing these 2 concepts frequently when you are teachers. You're going to be hearing about the need for culturally responsive teaching, and you're going to be hearing about the need to teach grit, particularly for secondary level students. So let's begin with culturally responsive teaching. As you'll see in the textbook, this is really going to relate to that culture and language element in the text. I have posted a video in this week's weekly folder. It's a great video. It talks about culturally responsive teaching and one teacher's methods for teaching within this framework of culturally responsive teaching. And a great quote from this video is, "It's helping your students find identity in their education." But more specifically, and to kind of expand that quote out, culturally responsive teaching acknowledges that there is nothing wrong with traditional texts, but strives to include material and context from other cultures, parts of the world, and by diverse authors. It also focuses on finding a hook and anchor to help draw students into the content using their past experiences. Again, I can't recommend this video enough. Please make sure you go through it. It's just a great little video, and I think it helps to provide, it's a great example of what culturally responsive teaching is all about. There are 5 culturally responsive teaching strategies that we can adopt as educators, and you'll see these in the video. It activates students' prior learning and prior knowledge. Students don't come into your classroom as blank slates. It's important to acknowledge that they bring a rich cultural history behind them. We have to make learning contextual. Why does it matter today in this school, in this community? And to make sure that when we're talking about our learning, we're framing it within our environment. We have to encourage students to leverage their cultural capital. And by this, we have to acknowledge the fact that students need to see their culture as a strength. It's not something that they should be embarrassed about or ashamed of. It's something that they need to see as a strength, that they bring to the table as a strength. We need to consider your classroom setup. Take a hard look at your classroom environment. Is it welcoming to different cultures? What material do you have? What posters do you have up on the walls? What reading material do you have that students can leaf through? Make sure that your environment reflects your culturally responsive teaching practices. And finally, we've been talking about this the whole class, but build relationships. It's everything that we've been learning here up to date. The second concept that I want to introduce this week is the concept of grit. And if you remember, I just want to jog your memory from last week and our conversation about the growth mindset and making sure that you remember what the growth mindset is. Many of you use this in your paper, and I was glad to see that. But to refresh your memory, remember the growth mindset is that ability, that mindset that it's not yet, that concept of we haven't gotten it yet, that it's not a fixed mindset, that it's predetermined by birth or intelligence, that it's the notion that you can build, you can continue to grow, that it is something that is not yet firmly developed. So grit builds upon that. Grit is the sustained perseverance and passion for long-term goals, according to Dr. Angela Lee Duckworth, a researcher studying achievement at the University of Pennsylvania, and she won a MacArthur Genius Grant for this in 2013. So this is a concept that you'll be hearing over and over again in education. There'll be a video, again, that I'm posting in the weekly folder, and it draws upon that principle of the growth mindset. And one way to think about this is that growth mindset is the starting block. It's where your mind is. And then grit is the race. Okay, so growth mindset is where you start. Grit is the race that you run. So in the textbook, they talk a lot about resilience, and this ties back to our notion of grit. The two kind of go hand in glove. I prefer the concept of grit, again, because that's the concept that you hear over and over again in education these days. In the textbook, there's a really handy and really useful quote that I'd like to have you all remember. Having an adult who essentially refuses to allow a student to fail is a common denominator in students who develop resilience. So having an adult who refuses to allow a student to fail. But I venture that we need to take that a step further. It isn't only about refusing to allow failure, it's about encouraging and teaching students to stick with it when it gets tough. This is a huge issue for gifted and talented students. In the textbook, you'll notice we talk a lot about diversity and differentiated learning, and we talk a lot about different student populations, but one of the populations that's overlooked, in my opinion, is the gifted and talented population that we're going to be encountering as teachers. And again, this notion of grit is particularly important for the gifted and talented student population. Things come easily to these students, but what happens when they actually have to work at something? What happens when they fail at something? And what messages are you giving these students as a teacher to encourage grit? So we can teach grit as teachers. We can do certain things to help our students develop grit in their academic life and beyond. It's important that we talk about the power of attitude and persistence. There's a great book by Malcolm Gladwell called The Outliers, and it talks about the rule of 10,000 hours, that in order for someone to be proficient or to be an expert, they need to commit 10,000 hours. Now, of course, with students, they don't have that time in your, say, biology class to commit 10,000 hours. But it's important to remind students that expertise only comes with attitude and persistence. You need to start with smaller problems that they can easily solve and help them to get some quick wins, okay? Sometimes for students, having that big goal at the end is really overwhelming. So it's important to kind of break it down maybe into smaller goals and to show students that when you achieve those smaller goals, it builds to the larger goal. It's important to share the why before what. We often fail to inspire kids because we don't share the relevance of the problem. It's important to provide that relevance for what you're doing, and that encourages kids to stick with it if they see what's behind it. When possible, place students in communities to work together. Of course, we've learned about this before in our development theories, particularly for this secondary age group. Students learn best in communities where they can solve problems in cooperation with peers. Generally speaking, they often give up when they feel alone or inferior. And that's important too, that kind of notion of team camaraderie helps you to kind of stick with it when the going gets tough. Reward hard work and delayed gratification. What gets rewarded gets repeated. I can't say that enough. Oh, I'm going to say it again because it's so important. What gets rewarded gets repeated. Affirm hard work and reward completion in the end. It is so important that as teachers, we affirm hard work. Don't affirm the grade, affirm hard work. That is key. Affirm the learning and the stick-to-itiveness and the tenacity, not the grade. Again, I can't say that enough, that it's really, really important for our students, particularly, again, going back to that population that we often overlook, the gifted and talented population, that we need to affirm hard work, not the grade. Because those kids are so used to getting that good grade that they often forget that sometimes you need to work at that grade, and sometimes you need to work hard at that learning. I guarantee you, particularly in Northern Virginia, my experience as a teacher there in Northern Virginia is that you have very high functioning kids. You have kids that are going to be functioning at a level that they know they're going to college. They've been told they're going to college, but when they get that grade that doesn't measure up to their expectations, we need to remind them that it's all about persistence. It's all about that hard work. All right. That's it for this week. If you have any questions or concerns, please feel free to text me. Again, that is the easiest way to get a hold of me. Hopefully, I get back to you fairly quickly. As a reminder, too, there are times during the weekend that I may be out and about and I may be doing things with my family. So just a little bit of patience. If I don't get back to you within like an hour or so, I will get back to you. And texting is the best way to reach me. So again, that's it for now. Happy studying.